All right. Good evening, everybody out there on YouTube and Facebook. It's Chris from the Common Grounds podcast, sponsored by roastersmarketplace.com. Thanks for tuning in tonight. I know everybody's busy. You might be busy at home, but everybody's busy on a Thursday night. So if you're taking the time to tune in tonight or tune in down the road or listen to the podcast later on, I really do appreciate it. We've added some more stuff at Roasters Marketplace in the last few days. We've added 2 new roasters in the last 2 weeks. We've got a bunch of good coffee. If y'all want to check that out, stop on by. But tonight, I'm really excited because we're going to kind of change it up tonight. Tonight, we're talking to Emily Smith from Novus Coffee Imports. What they do is they specialize on getting the coffee from point A, where it's grown, to point B, where it's roasted. And so I'm really super excited to learn more about that portion of the process. I've talked to farmers, on here. We've talked to roasters, but we haven't talked to any dedicated importers of the coffee. And Novus is a really cool company, and Emily knows a whole bunch about the coffee logistics supply chain. And so if you're tuning in tonight, stop by, drop some comments in the chat. I'll put up some stuff on that on YouTube and on Facebook. And if you're listening to this down the road, thanks for tuning in. And let's get this show started. Hey, good evening, Emily. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Hey, welcome to the Common Grounds podcast. I'm glad that you're able to jump on here with us tonight and tell our audience tonight and in the future a little bit about how the coffee importation business works and what y'all are doing to responsibly source coffees from all over the world. So, Emily, if you will, go ahead and introduce yourself to my audience. Tell me a little bit about you, how you got into coffee, first off, because that's the common thread here, is how you got into coffee, and then how you actually got into the coffee industry, if you will.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm Emily. I am a green coffee. I do green coffee sales for Novus Coffee Imports. Novus is a pretty new company. We've been around only for about a year, which means I've been doing green coffee sales for about a year. And previously, my experience is as a roaster. I was head roaster and green buyer for a company in Portland. I am a community representative for the SCA US chapter. And let's see, do a lot of help with Roasters Guild. And really my passion comes from the roasting side. Before roasting coffee, I also worked with production management. I did QA for a large coffee roaster who did about 13 million pounds of coffee a year. So when containers would come in, I would go and open the containers and inspect them, pull samples, and do quality control, sample roasting and cupping. I'm a licensed Q grader, and I think that kind of covers it. I've been in coffee for a little while. I've also done the retail management side. Opened one of the largest. Was part of the opening management team for one of the largest coffee shops in the world when we opened the Starbucks Reserve Roastery back in the day. So I've seen a few things, been a few places.
That's pretty cool. It's always neat to get somebody on that, a lot of people I interview on here, I know, like that's how you start in podcasting. You start interviewing the people that that have an interesting story. And so I've seen your post on the Coffee Roasters Guild forum because on the Facebook page because I'm a member, I'm an SCA member, and I've been on there, but I had no idea about that history. That's so cool. So let's not even talk about let's go back and talk about how did you get into roasting coffee though? I mean, what was that transition from where you started into the coffee industry to roasting?
So I started in kind of strange, but also I found very common. I really loved coffee, and I was looking for a career change. I was working in social services, doing child welfare case management, which is like just grueling. And so I would work these like terrible long days. And as part of doing child welfare, nobody wants to see you ever. No matter where you show up to, everybody is unhappy that you're there. It's constantly being met with just, oh, people are really upset. And so I used to go to Starbucks every day. I did not need a coffee, but I would go to Starbucks every day, just so that I could have somebody who smiled at me and was happy to see me. And I was like, this is like my little sanctuary. So when I was leaving child welfare and I needed to find a new career path, I had gone to Costa Rica on my honeymoon and gone to a coffee farm. And I thought, I want to get into coffee. I want to work with farmers. So I didn't know how to do that. So I just went and applied at Starbucks and got a job working at Starbucks. And I told them all that my goal was to one day work with coffee farmers. And they all thought I was crazy because nobody goes to become a barista at Starbucks to work with coffee farmers. But I slowly kind of made my way through, learned, because I'm in the Pacific Northwest. So I was able to go as even when I was just a barista or in management, I was able to go up to Seattle to the corporate office, and I figured out the email address of the person who ran the cupping lab, because I figured out how they put their email addresses together, and I saw her name mentioned somewhere. So I just started emailing her, and she invited me up. And my first cupping that I ever did was at the Starbucks headquarters, cupping arrival samples of Brazil, and I think we cupped about 600 cups, and that was my first time cupping was 600 cups on the table. All sorts of quality levels that came through, but that got me really into green coffee. And then I went and found a giant roaster that was hiring for quality control. And I in between there, I had started toll roasting on my own and renting time out on a roaster and buying some green coffee. And so I really wanted that job doing the quality control. So I took a bag of coffee that I had roasted, and I made a label with my resume on it. And I put my resume as the label, and went and dropped it off over to them. And that was how I got my interview. And
that's smooth. That's really smooth. That's really awesome.
I feel like in coffee, when you really want something, you got to hustle and try to stand out in a really big crowd. So
yeah,
I'm kind of creative, and that was my way of standing out in a big crowd. So yeah, they took a chance on me, and that's when I learned how to sample roast. And I used to sample roast on a 4-barrel Jabez Burns for, I don't know, like 6 hours at a time. And I would just sample roast and cup and sample roast and cup. And I did that and just kept moving through coffee.
That's amazing. That's a really cool story. And stories like yours, stories like this is what I encounter a lot in the roasting community of, guys that were in IT for 30 years and started roasting on a popcorn machine. And, this is what they're doing in retirement.
Yeah.
I've got 2 different guys like that. And it's just amazing how the different stories that you get in this industry. And I'm sure it is that way in a lot of different industries, but coffee's kind of cool.
Yeah, for sure.
And how did you get started with Novus?
So I had been kind of looking to get into doing green coffee sales. I'd worked previously for another importer, not doing sales, but doing quality control, and had worked. I knew a lot of people who were importing coffee and worked alongside them. So I just kept my eyes open. Really, there are a lot of jobs that pop up, and I think green coffee sales is not super common. But whenever you get into doing any kind of sales, you need to be really confident about what you're going to be selling, making sure that. So, a couple of things I really looked for. I wanted to make sure that the company was stable. I wanted to make sure that they had a really good philosophy about how they were managing work at origin, what their long-term view for coffee sustainability looked like, and especially the financial sustainability of the coffee supply chain. And so I just kind of kept my eyes out and waited until the right opportunity came up. And so that's where I came in and joined Novus. Actually, I previously when I worked for Starbucks, had been part of the opening the Reserve Roastery. And during that experience, I got to work with some really, really cool people at the very top of like the global coffee program at Starbucks. And it turns out that's who I work for now. So some people who had retired from Starbucks, but were very familiar names to me, and who had really inspired me at the beginning of my coffee career. So when I heard that they were involved in the project, I was really drawn to their leadership style, and that was kind of the part that sealed the deal. So a lot of people who sell coffee, and it's really important to me to be part of a team that you feel really supported by. So that was a big part of what I wanted to do.
That's awesome. So tell us, we'll actually get into the nuts and bolts of this now. So you mentioned sustainability at the farm level. So hold on, we got a comment. Let's see what we got. Oh, one of my buddies in San Diego is watching us and drinking a cup right now from Roasters Marketplace. So that's cool. But when you talk about sustainability at the farm level, explain that a little bit to our viewers.
Sure. So sustainability is a word that gets thrown around all the time. And I honestly, I think you have to really think about what sustainability means to you. So you can talk about environmental sustainability. You can look at the sustainability of the business from a business perspective. And those are, I guess, are kind of the two main ones. There's a lot of, I feel like maybe 10 years ago, the buzz was really around what environmental sustainability looked like. We talked a lot about things like organic and different certifications, and how that was, what practices were happening on the farm. Today, I feel like the conversation for sustainability has really shifted because of the coffee. There's a crisis in the way coffee is priced, that because coffee is traded on a market, oftentimes coffee is traded and sold below what the cost of the production actually is, which ends up in a net loss for the farmer, which overall is closing and shutting down farms all over the world. So there's a financial sustainability side, and then there's also that common environmental sustainability, and along with that, also just the way in which the farm is interacting with the community as well. So we look at like social responsibility, environmental responsibility, and an overall kind of business sustainability.
And I know this is probably a really hot topic and we don't know yet, but what sort of impacts is the current global crisis having on farms? I mean, I know we're not buying as much coffee. They're not roasting as much coffee right now. So
small roasters are not buying and roasting as much coffee right now. There are roasters who have sales through grocery channels or internet, who are seeing 200 to 400% increase in what their what those channels normally do. So it really depends on how that business was broken up. And what we're seeing is that large roasters are roasting a ton of coffee. So on the supply side, we are moving a lot of coffee, a lot of spot coffee, which is coffee that is already landed in the United States. So not forward contracted, but available right now. And on the, like, at a warehouse. So that coffee is moving very, very quickly. So we're seeing that happening. The overall pricing of coffee, kind of what I've heard from a lot of people is we have no idea. I mean, that's our company. We're part of a large company called Mercon, and Mercon's been around for 65 years, and they're based in Nicaragua, and they've been through all sorts of crazy, like, dictators and political upheaval and everything else, and they have no idea of what we're expecting. So overall, we are cautious, and for a lot of the coffee, it's kind of business as usual with how we're interacting and trading coffee, and we're just paying really close attention. There are some countries that might be more affected than others, and we're just going to have to kind of wait and see. So
it's from our standpoint, we went from consuming in the house maybe 120 grams a day to we're at like at least 180 or 160 to 200, depends on how much we're drinking.
Yeah.
And so, I ordered my first 5-pound bag of coffee the other day because I was like, okay, hey, we're going through it a little bit more because now my wife's having 2 to 3 cups at home.
Yep. So it's a shift in consumer preferences is kind of what we're seeing. So I don't know that people are drinking less coffee, but the way in which they are making their coffee, or the traditions that surround how they're consuming their coffee are changing a lot. So that's one thing that we're seeing. And, a lot of the big roasters that I mentioned who are buying up coffee right now are people who have a sizable portion on grocery store shelves. So I think there's a lot of trying to make sure that those that they have coffee readily available for those. But for my small roaster customers, it's really across the board. It kind of just depends on how they have built up their businesses and how they funneled their coffee, I think, what channels.
That's what we've been seeing with our roasters is that, if they're all on internet sales, they've seen a slight drop since they're not really nationally known websites. But the guys that are roasting a lot for local restaurants and stuff have seen a really big hit on their wholesale contracts, which is not good. But they've come up with some pretty clever ways of making that up.
Yeah, and we're trying really hard at Novus to try to be flexible and helpful for our roasters. One thing I would just say to any coffee roasters who are out there, just communicate with your coffee importer. If you have contracts that are outstanding, there are people who are buying up a lot of coffee right now, and so it's actually pretty easy to get out of your contract if you ask. So if you feel like you are bogged down in coffee that is aging or on contract, definitely talk to your coffee importer. It's in my best interest to have all of my roasters succeed and make it through this tough time. So we are really, really working hard to try to make sure that the roasters that we work with are set up for success when they are back to roasting. So just communicate. That's the best thing.
After we went off on that
sorry
interview, we went off that on a little bit early. I wanted to cover that later, but it's okay. So when we're looking at sustainability,
Mhm.
and we're looking at getting the money back to, or I'll say the investment. If we can look back at getting the investment to the farm as close as possible to make sure that they're reinvesting what they're getting in, so that they're succeeding and putting off a better product next year possibly. What are y'all doing, or do y'all do anything on that side?
Yeah, so we actually have a really, let me give just a little bit of context. Novus is the small specialty wing of a much larger company called Mercon. Mercon's based in Nicaragua. They've been around for 65 years, and we have bases of operation in Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, Brazil, Ethiopia, and Vietnam. And to give you a little idea of scale, Mercon is the largest exporter out of Nicaragua and the largest exporter out of Vietnam. So we move a lot of coffee. And a few years back, they were really seeing this need for a very holistic approach to sustainability. So we have this program in place called LIFT. And LIFT is really a grassroots kind of farmer-based. It came from the farmers themselves and from being at origin with these field offices. So with the LIFT program, farmers can sign up to be a part of it. They go through 10 months of educational and training that covers everything from social responsibility, agronomy, business acumen and business management, as well as harvesting, the full spectrum. So going through this program, it started in Guatemala, and our farms in Guatemala are going on their fourth year. So each year the farmer can go back through and reapply. When they're part of LIFT, we make a guarantee to them that we're going to buy all of their coffee. So our goal with LIFT is to help them to improve the yield on their farms while maintaining the quality or improving the quality, with the guarantee that we're going to buy everything. So this is something that I think a lot of small roasters, it's a piece that's missing from how small roasters look at sustainability, is that a farmer grows a bunch of coffee and they may only have like 10% that is specialty grade that's ever going to make it over to be a micro lot and to be at that level. Their farm is really supported by that 90% of coffee that is maybe a lower quality that they're going to be selling to a mill or combining into a regional lot. And that coffee might not even be specialty grade. It might be a 78-point coffee, might be an 80-point coffee. And it might be something that normally a specialty roaster wouldn't even look at. Because of the scale that Mercon works in, we can guarantee to buy all of their coffee. So everything gets purchased. Everything that comes through at specialty grade kind of shifts over to Novus, and then we have the opportunity to sell these premium coffees and highlight them and provide a premium to them. But it means a lot to the farmer to know that all of their coffee is sold. So when we talk about sustainability, our farmers are going through this program. They have 10 months during the year where they have the educational services. They also have an agronomist that works with them, so somebody who's helping them on the farm, and that person has kind of like a caseload of farmers that they work with. So they have a dedicated agronomist, and then the goal is to improve their yield. And the farms in Guatemala that just completed their third year in the LIFT program, those farms have shown a 40% increase in the yield on their coffee while improving quality. So when we look at sustainability, that's kind of, we take a holistic approach. Like we have to keep the farm in business in order to keep it going, right? So we have to approach the whole farm, the community, the farm, the environment that the farm is in. So that's kind of where we're at. We have the LIFT program working in Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Vietnam. And we are currently building out the program in Colombia and in Ethiopia. So that's our big, it's not a certification. The farmer does not have to pass any tests or anything like that. It is an educational opportunity and just a bunch of support services for the farmer.
And so that really, does that cost the farmer anything, or is it's
nope.
just
no, for us it's a so the farmer is in the program. We tell them that we will buy all of their coffee, but they don't have to sell it to us. So they can say, hey, I decided I'm actually going to go and sell half of my coffee to this other person who's offering me maybe like a premium price. I don't know. They're not in any sort of contract to sell us the coffee. They're not in any sort of, it's just a program for them to be in. But what we found, though, is that the farmers are so appreciative of this. A lot of farmers, farmers are amazing and wonderful people. They are incredibly keen with how they run their businesses. And I also feel like they're also very loyal to, they recognize a good business relationship. So we have farmers who have been working with Mercon for generations and are actively involved in this program and seeing a lot of benefit from their farms. And they sell us their coffee. So there's no cost to the farmer. There's no contractual obligation. But that farmer can take that guarantee that Mercon has offered them that we're going to buy all of their coffee. They can take that guarantee and use that to provide financing or to get supplies that they need for the farm.
And how many farms would you say, or can you say, that's in the program?
Ooh, I am not sure. I know in Vietnam, we have a cluster of 240 farmers that are in the program. And we kind of look at it as clusters. It's not a cooperative, but we do have these kind of like little centers within different regions that are involved in the LIFT program. And each center has about 250 farms. So we have multiple centers in Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua that are involved, as well as the cluster in Vietnam.
So for somebody that's not versed well in the coffee farming industry, how big would you say that the typical farm is in acreage? And the fact that I know from my education in coffee, like for instance, Ethiopia, you don't get a lot of micro lots because they might not even have enough coffee to put, the farm is very, very small. And so what would you say your average size farm would be? And would that be depending on the country as well?
Yeah, it's totally dependent on the country. The farms in Vietnam average about 2 hectares. And I am not good at math and translating that into acres, so I apologize. They're very small. So the farms in Vietnam are really small. The farms in Central America are larger. We are able to get some farm specific. In particular, I'm thinking, we have some farms that we work with in Honduras that are part of this program that are large enough that, we don't get a full container off of the farm, but we get half a container of coffee off of the farm, which is a good sized portion. So it's really farms of all sizes. Yeah.
So here's my next question on here. explain what a micro lot would be and how that is determined? Does that make sense?
Yeah, usually when we talk about a micro lot, we are talking about something that is less than a container size. So a container is like 240 bags of coffee. It depends on the size of the bag and the country that it's from. So I think it's like 275 out of most Central American countries, like 240 out of Colombia, 320 out of Brazil. So you do the math.
And you say you're not good at math.
Just like remembering things that go on contracts. But usually when we're talking about a micro lot, we're talking about something that's less than a container full of coffee. And it's something that is traceable to a farm, like a specific farm or a very small cluster of farmers. So there's usually a degree of traceability so first of all, there's no like clear defined, this is a micro lot, this is not a micro lot. When we talk about micro lot, we're really just kind of, it's a descriptor for a coffee that's usually less than a full container, comes from a particular area or farm or small cluster of farms that has a larger degree of traceability.
So when I'm on our website on Roasters Marketplace, when I put up on a specific coffee that it's a micro lot from this farm, then you know that there's a reason that it's going for that premium price, is because it might have had a really good cupping score.
Yeah.
And now that there's only 60 bags of it in the world, and that's.
Yeah, so there's usually a reason that a farmer would separate that coffee off, right? There's a reason that coffee didn't get blended into a larger, like a regional blend, right? So if you might have a like a Guatemala Antigua coffee, and I think we've probably all looked at like an offer sheet from a coffee importer, and it'll say like Antigua Select or Antigua Blend, right? That's a regional blend of coffees that have a similar quality, that create a very unique cut profile, but they're all being blended together. So it comes from a bunch of different farms. And then when you have so we would say that's like a regional blend. When you have a micro lot, usually there's a reason why that coffee was not sold to a mill and blended in with everything. So sometimes it is that the producer has their own mill on site, and they're doing what we call micro milling. So they're doing all the processing themselves, or a portion of the processing themselves, and that coffee is separated off, and there's like an artisan quality to how it's processed.
Honey process, or natural processed, or
exactly.
Raised bed dried on the south side of the slope, and
you'll see this a lot with coffees in Costa Rica. Micro milling is very common. That they will do at least part of the processing themselves at their farm. And then you might have a coffee that within the farm itself, it was segregated off because it's a particular varietal, like it's a red Bourbon, or it's we've all seen the micro lots of geisha coffee, right? So there might be a very specific reason to the plant, that those plants have a unique characteristic, that's why they're separated off. Or you could have just a very unique processing method for why it was separated off. You also have large mills in an area, like in Colombia. They're not usually going to micro mill and process it themselves, but when they take it to the mill, if it's an exceptional quality, the mill will separate it off, and you'll create micro lots at the mill. So there's a whole bunch of different ways in which a micro lot can be made. But the big thing is that there's a reason, and it's usually a quality reason. There's a reason why that coffee was separated off, if that makes sense.
No, that makes awesome sense, and thank you for explaining that because I've had that question to me multiple times. This whole little clip that we just did is going to be turned into a little YouTube video on just micro lots because it's so interesting, and it's information that I, as a consumer, had no idea about 8 months ago. Had no
Yeah.
idea about.
And I would also say, like, you could have, so if there's a regional blend from, let's just use Antigua and region of Guatemala as an example. The Antigua is a coffee that typically has a very unique cut profile. It's usually really chocolatey, nutty, and has a lemon acidity to it. If I go to somebody and I say, hey, do you have any Guatemala Antigua? That's usually the cut profile that I'm looking for. However, if you are cupping through microlots out of Antigua, you might have a base of kind of like those flavors, but then nuances that come through with each farm and each microlot. And those nuances are the reason why that coffee was not blended into a larger regional selection. And there's usually things that the farmer is doing, whether it's the kind of coffee that they're planting, the way in which they're farming that coffee, exactly what time it was harvested, how ripe the cherries were, how the farmer chose to process it. So many things that the farmer does to make that into something unique and special. And those are going to be your microlots that you would see. So it's always worth it to explore some of those beautiful microlots out of a region that you might be familiar with, because those microlots might have a really unique kind of twist or take on that coffee.
And that's why I started really getting into this, is because it's so much fun, and I can have a cup of coffee at 9 o'clock in the morning. And I love craft beer, and I love small label, small batch whiskey and stuff like that. But people start getting upset when you start drinking at 9 o'clock in the morning, but you can get away with it with coffee.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what I want to share with so many people out there, is that it's so good if it's made right, and if it's harvested right, and if it's processed right, and you get it and you do everything in your power to make that really good cup of coffee. It's so much fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I would also, though, just give a pitch to those regional selections, the regional coffees that everybody loves. And I think that there's a real value in the coffee supply chain. Those coffees have a really a big contribution that they make to the overall sustainability of the industry. Those regional coffees that get blended in together would likely represent the larger portion of a farmer's farm, right? So they might separate off 10% to do a microlot and then sell the rest of it to be blended together to be a regional selection. And I just think that, as coffee people, sometimes we can shun our nose at some of those blends, or regional selection coffees. And I think that there's a really special place for them. And I love to see them roast, like when a roaster gets it and roasts it really, really well. And it's just approachable and nice, and it represents a region of the world so perfectly.
We have a Colombian on the website that's really, really good. And it's like, if you said that this is a cup of coffee, this is what every cup of coffee that could be really judged by, and it's a regional blend. It's not a micro lot. You take a sip first thing in the morning, you're like, that's it. It. I'm good for the day. And it's so good.
We have a Vietnam it's my favorite coffee, and that's what it is. I was explaining it to somebody today. I was like, it's like when you think of what coffee tastes like, this is what coffee tastes like. It's sweet, it's chocolatey, it's kind of nutty, it has a little bit lower acidity. There's nothing really different about it, like spectacular, but I can sit and drink like 3 or 4 cups of this coffee. And it's so nice. It's just that perfect, this is coffee. It's done really well for people because when they sell it, like it's a great coffee to have in a grocery store or something like that, because the average person goes to a shelf and looks, and they might be overwhelmed by all of these different flavor descriptors. So when you say sweet, chocolate, nutty,
Yeah.
bam, like, and then they taste it and they're like, yep, tastes like coffee. Great. So there's definitely a place for those coffees.
Definitely. How much would you say in the industry, or like a good regional blend, what would that typically cup at? So I can
Yeah.
have in my mind. So
Yeah, so I think so. This Vietnam that we have, it cups around an 84. It's a washed Arabica. I think that your common regional blends cup anywhere between like an 82 to an 80, 84, 85. And they typically, like I said, they typically represent a cup profile of a set of flavors that have been kind of established within the industry and market as being classic for that region. So, an Antigua from Guatemala tastes one way, a Colombia Medellin tastes a certain way. When I cup a Nicaragua from Jinotega, I think it's going to taste a certain way. If you've had a Sidama from Ethiopia, there's a very specific, or a Yirgacheffe. Yirgacheffe is one of the ones that's like so classically defined with its flavor profile. So when you look at a regional blend, you typically are going to see a very nice representation of those flavor qualities. So,
and not back. So only recently have I gotten into specialty coffee, and prior to that, I had a buddy who's like, you need to try an Ethiopian Yirgacheffe. That's what you need to try. And I tried it. I was like, and this coffee's horrible. Like I was doing a horrible ratio and not doing it right and a whole bunch of stuff. But now that I know what I'm doing and what I'm supposed to be tasting, I love it. Like, this is really good coffee because I know what I'm doing. But I also know that it's supposed to have that lemony citrus, those more bright notes to it.
And I'll just say, like, not everybody likes every coffee. Even within the coffee drinkers, I interact with a lot of people who love specialty coffee and don't like anything from Sumatra. That's totally okay. I don't like Kenyan coffees. It's really weird. I know I'm supposed to because they score really high. I don't really like them. So it's okay to have coffees that you don't care for. I would just say it's really important to understand what your customers like in coffee and make sure that what you're buying matches what your customers are looking for.
We've got a question up there from one of my roasters, actually, and I'm going to pull it up on the screen. Wilfredo, he's with Liam and Ian Coffee Roasters out of Salt Lake City. He says, hello, I tuned into a little late. My question is about green bean quality. Do they have a quality program, and what do you do to assure good quality to their roasters customers?
Sure. So I'm going to approach this, just break it apart a little bit. First of all, Novus does have a quality program, and any importer that you work with should have a quality program. It's super okay for you to ask about that when you are buying your coffee. So we sample the coffee on offer, and then depending on offer, if we purchase a coffee, we then get another sample right before the coffee is about to ship. That's a pre-shipment sample. We compare that to the offer sample to make sure that those taste the same and are at least where they should be or above. Oftentimes, we've been pretty lucky that the pre-ships are better than the offer samples were. So that's a nice surprise. So it comes in as a pre-shipment sample. We taste that. Then the coffee gets loaded onto a ship. The coffee goes over. Now, it's possible for a lot of bad stuff to happen to coffee when it is on a ship, depending on where the container gets stacked on the ship. I actually had a container that I opened one time that the claw that moves the container had ripped the entire top like of one of the corners off. And then the container was at the bottom, which meant it flooded with water all over the place. So when the container comes in and it goes over to the warehouse, somebody at the warehouse is going to inspect the container to see if there was any sort of damage, because they're going to notify us if there is. We receive a sample of that coffee, and that's what we call the arrival sample. We're going to go through and cup the arrival sample to make sure that that coffee is consistent with all of the other samples and that there are no quality issues that would have happened during the shipping process. Then we go through, and so that's the point where we call it an arrival sample. As a roaster, when we send you out samples, we're going to let you know if it's a pre-shipment sample or an arrival sample. If you've contracted coffee in advance, so say you're contracted for this next harvest, you might get a pre-shipment sample, and then your contracted oftentimes is pending approval from an arrival sample. So you have that little window. If there's something that you think is wrong with the coffee, you can ask your if you've contracted in advance for a forward contract. So the arrival sample comes in, and typically that's the point where now we're sending samples out to roasters. So when you taste the coffee, we've already cupped it, that lot of coffee, 3, 4, maybe 5 times through the different processes. And then we pull samples from each warehouse. So for us, coffee comes into Seattle, and then we might distribute it to San Francisco, Houston, Portland. So then every 3 months, we pull a sample from every one of the warehouses where we have coffee stored so that we can see how the coffee is aging. And then different conditions in different warehouses could potentially cause differences in how it ages. Things typically age quicker in the South with the humidity. Things tend to age better in the Pacific Northwest, which is why we store most of our coffee here. So that's a little bit about our quality program. And let's see, what do you do to assure good quality to the roasters' customers? I think that's a lot on the roaster. So I try to do everything I can do to make sure that the coffee is the way that you've tried it. So I'm going to give you an arrival sample to make, and my hope is that you're going to cup that sample. And we offer samples green, but we also offer to roast the sample for roasters who don't have access to a sample roaster. It's so incredibly important to cup your coffee. If you don't have cupping supplies, then at least to brew your coffee in some sort of way. You should try your coffee before you make the purchase so that you know. And I'd recommend that when you try a sample of coffee that you make some notes on how that coffee tastes so that when the coffee arrives to you, if you get a roasted sample, you can also ask for a green sample so you can actually see physically what it looks like to make sure it should be a nice, if it's new, it should be a nice kind of jade green color. You want to watch for any sort of like yellowing or white color that's on the beans that might show that it has some age. I'd recommend investing in like a $10 blacklight and blacklighting your coffee when you have a green sample. If you see glowing, a whole bunch of glowing on the beans, that is usually not mold. I would not send you coffee that had a mold on it. However, as coffee ages, the lipids and the fats inside the bean migrate to the outside of the bean and they oxidize. And that's what's glowing under the black light. So that's a great way to get a green sample and to just test it and see how aged the coffee might be. So if you have a lot of glowing beans, you know that you're working with a coffee that might be aged a little bit. But I think a lot of the quality, when you talk about quality to the end customer, a lot of that's on the roaster. I was a roaster, and I know that I am fully capable of roasting a great coffee, and I am fully capable of completely messing up a great coffee. So I as much
I think Will meant as your customers, the
yeah.
roasters, your customers.
Yeah,
You know,
we do everything
so.
that we can do. But if you, I think a lot of it is asking questions and make sure that you roast or try a sample of the coffee before you purchase it. I'd recommend requesting a green, like 100-gram green sample and keeping that, checking that with the black light when you get it before you go ahead and make the purchase. And also to if you can keep a sample, comparing it to when the coffee gets there, that's good too.
Awesome. He appreciates your answer.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, and I know I've had Will. He's been with me since I think December on Roasters Marketplace, and he roasts one batch. His little niche is he'll buy one lot and he'll roast it a light, a medium, and a dark, and that's it.
Yes.
That's all he'll do is that one lot, and that's what he offers. So it's really cool. He does some cool stuff. So y'all have to talk after this, but it's such the logistics side of it is amazing. How it works. So once the coffee, y'all buy the coffee. Tell us the process of that coffee getting to one of your warehouses.
Yeah. So first of all, we have people on the ground because we have offices in Honduras, Guatemala, all of these different places. We have people on the ground, and they typically will say, "Hey, this farmer that we've been working with has this amazing coffee. I'd like you guys to try it out." And they'll send us over an offer. They'll say like, "Hey, these are the best lots that we have out of this region. Check them out." So we'll go through and we'll cup them and see if we like any of them. When we make a purchase on a coffee, then that coffee gets loaded on. So that's our offer sample. The next piece is after, and sometimes those offer samples are really, really fresh. So this is why we get an offer sample. Then we also get a pre-shipment sample because sometimes those offer samples are so fresh that they're almost like a little bit green and like they're not rested. So coffee during the processing needs to rest for a while. And we'll get a sample from something that's not rested. And we have to kind of say, okay, well, hopefully this is super fresh. It tastes really green and kind of wild. And we're gonna make an offer on it and then hope that coffee keeps improving, right? So there's sometimes when we have to make a little bit of a gamble on that. So then the coffee comes in with we'll get a pre-shipment sample. At the time when that pre-shipment sample happens, that coffee has gone through all of the milling. It's been rested. It's been bagged. And the pre-shipment sample is taken when the coffee is being loaded into the container. So bam, we've got a pre-shipment sample on the container. Then that container is moving over. During each portion, there's rules that govern how, like if something terrible were to happen, if we got a pre-shipment sample and it tastes phenolic and we know, hey, something happened in the drying portion of that coffee or how it was stored, they left something out in the rain or the humidity got crazy, then we could say we can't take that coffee and we would reject it off of that sample. And there's rules that govern how contracts work with all of that. So coffee, everything's good. Coffee is on the boat. Boat comes up to port. At port, that container gets unloaded. It may or may not get inspected by customs. Certain countries get inspected by customs a lot. When you have coffee that's listed out of Medellin, Colombia, that gets inspected by customs all the time. El Salvador gets inspected by customs all the time.
One of my shipments from Guatemala got cut open by customs a couple of weeks ago. So,
and so I'll just say that as if you get a bag that has some sort of craziness that happened to it, let your importer know because it's quite possible that got inspected by customs, and they are not delicate or fragile or, careful with anything that they do. So just, fair warning on that. So, and your importer will make it right for you. We'll fix it, but just, that can happen. So the coffee comes over, it gets, the container, if it passes, it'll go from port and then over to the warehouse. And at the warehouse, we have the warehouse team will open the container, they'll unload the container, they'll categorize everything. They usually have an internal system for tagging everything and how they're going to organize it. Then we get another set of samples. Now, I won't release, so I don't release coffee. I might have, if I sold a coffee in advance and my roaster is waiting for that coffee to arrive, it has to get approved by our quality team. The arrival sample has to get approved by our quality team before I can release that coffee, if that makes sense. I want to make sure that nothing happened to that coffee. So, so then we go and release the coffee. We cut through everything, and if everything's good, then that coffee is ready to go, and we'll start moving it out of the warehouse.
That's cool.
Yeah. So one of the things that's kind of interesting right now is that because of all of these issues with the coronavirus, coffee is not moving out of warehouses very fast. So what's happening is harvests are coming in and warehouses are starting to become full. So give a little bit of heads up to anybody. They may see additional charges that are going to happen on coffees with this harvest, additional, not big, but like small couple pennies here, because the warehouses are charging a lot of additional costs because now they have to find a new warehouse to store coffee in. So there's a lot more storage fees that are happening, and that's likely to kind of get passed along the supply chain.
Definitely. You got to pass that cost along.
Yeah. So, unfortunately.
Well, Emily, we have already went almost an hour. It's been we should have done this in part 1 and part 2.
I am available for all of the parts. We anytime. This is super fun to talk to you and really fun to talk to the roasters and answer questions. So anytime, any subject, go for it.
Okay. And tell me a little bit. One, I want to thank you for coming on the show. But before I let you go, tell me a little bit about what you do with the SCA.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So everybody is probably aware of the SCA as an international organization. But we also have the SCA is we have a U.S. chapter for the SCA. And the U.S. chapter is really all about how do we involve, engage, and help to uplift the coffee industry in the United States. You do not need to have any sort of membership to the SCA to be a part of the U.S. chapter. So if you ever see any of our stuff that we're doing, but we are the ones who are behind the competitions, the U.S. coffee competitions that are happening. We try to be out there to support our local coffee industry through other events, latte art, throwdowns, educational events. We're kind of behind all of that. I am one of the community members of the SCA for the Northwest region. So I'm part of, I think we have like 25 people who represent different regions and communities. I think we have like 5 out of each region. And we're just here to support and help and uplift our coffee community. You can go to, I think there's a webpage for the US chapter. It'll also have links to all of the different, each region has its own Slack channel. And you can find out about activities, find out what's going on with your region, and connect, network. We're trying to put together a lot of resources right now for individuals in the coffee industry who have been negatively impacted by shutdowns. So we've got a lot of links to business help and different funds that are available, and we're here to support. So our big thing is to support. Yeah, that's it.
That's the main
one. Yeah, we have a US chapter website as well. It's not as fancy. And I would just say, like, you don't need to be a member to be active and involved in your US chapter. It's for everybody.
Awesome. That was one of the things I did when I first got into this. Was I went and I took the introduction to coffee class with a local trainer who actually came in second or third place at the Brewers Comp here a couple of months ago.
Who was it?
I would butcher his name if I said it.
Okay.
I can't even. Joseph knows who I'm talking about on here, but he's from Houston. He's got a blended in cafe as his. Hold on, I'll tell you. Wayne, I don't want to even. Wei Hong. Wei.
Okay.
Yeah, do you know who I'm talking about?
Nope, but
I'm
familiar with blended in though.
Okay. So let me see if I can. Yeah, here's Weihong. Wei Hong is his name, and awesome guy. That was the fantastic class, and really, really good coffee. So,
awesome. Yeah.
But the SCA has been really helpful in finding out really good information, and I need to coordinate with you after we end the show here a little bit on that too. So once again, Emily, thank you, and I'm going to definitely have you back on.
Yeah, anytime.
And just hang out here in the green room while I roll out. Everybody who tuned in tonight or is listening down the road on the podcast, I appreciate it. Thanks for tuning in. And we'll see you again next week when I am interviewing. I lost my schedule. Hold up. I'll tell you who I am interviewing next week. Sorry about that. I got a slow week next week. I should be interviewing Mike from Rising Rooster at some point next week, but anyway, Emily, thank you so much, and I'll hit you back up here in the green room.
Okay.
Have a great night, everybody.
Bye.